Welcome back to the Floyd Memorial Library podcast, a window into the soul of the North Fork of Long Island. We'll delve into the pulse of our community, its pressing issues, promising opportunities, and the rich stories that weave our shared history. I'm your host, Christopher Bianchi, and for episode 80, we sit down with Leslie Merinoff, the visionary founder and distiller behind Matchbook Distilling Co. in Greenport. We explore her deep-rooted connection to the liquor business, tracing back to her ancestor Hiram Walker, the founder of Canadian Club Whiskey, and her family's storied history during Prohibition. Leslie shares insights from her upbringing in New Jersey, her school years, and her early fascination with the spirits industry. She reflects on her enduring bond with the East End of Long Island and her journey through the liquor industry post-college, which ultimately led her to establish her own distillery in Greenport. In our conversation, Leslie reveals the inspirations that shaped her distillery, the influence of the North Fork's farmlands on her operations, the innovative processes that make Matchbook Distilling Co. unique. We delve into some of her exciting collaborations and the distinctive tasting room experience. Finally, Leslie shares what she loves about living and working on the North Fork and her hopes for the future of this special region. So I hope you enjoy episode 80 with Leslie Merinoff. This episode was recorded June 28th, 2024. Thank you so much for coming on to the Floyd Memorial Library podcast today. I'm looking forward to talking with you.
Same. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So can you give us a little introduction about yourself, where you were born and raised?
Yes. So I was born in New York City, and then we moved to New Jersey, just outside of the city, when I was pretty young. My parents had lived a very city-based life, and so my brother and I in New Jersey got to have a nice crossover of culturally being surrounded by the city, but then going home to a quiet farmhouse in the evening. And then I spent summers going out to the East End. I worked on a farm, and I spent a lot of time in the ocean.
And in terms of your ancestry, how far back can you go, whether on either your parents' side?
So on my mother's side, it goes back very far, but in terms of the professional lineage, it really goes back to Hiram Walker, who created Canadian Club. He was a grocer who found kind of at times moderate success, but ultimate failure in the grocery business. But he started distilling vinegar and making this malt vinegar, which was really kind of popular and led him to start distilling whiskey. And then he built this distillery that is still around and known today as Canadian Club. It's certainly past its prime. Canadian Club is barely relevant on the back bars today, but it's still very much around, and the legacy of Canadian Club is very profound, and it influences me in my day-to-day.
Wow.
Yeah. And then on my dad's side, suffice it to say that family history begins at the end of Prohibition, when we built a legal alcohol distribution business that we still run in the family today. So I come from two sides of pretty big liquor, big liquor families.
And that was interesting with the Canadian Club. And you mentioned that it still has the legacy of it today, but you said it's not as much in bars. Do you know some reason why that might be?
Yeah, I think there are a number of reasons why. For one, I think it's considered to be quite old-fashioned. And I think that that Canadian style whiskeys just kind of fell out of fashion. In particular, the use of making these like blended rye whiskeys. Today, when people are whiskey fanatics, they tend to be either bourbon fanatics or single malt. Those are the two big trends. And I think that over time, I'm trying to be political about it because as trends changed, I think Canadian Club became they really started to hang their hat on their price point as being something that is made by people, but that is a real value brand, and they've continued to push that. So it is, yes, it's a lower price point whiskey, and it seems to me sometimes that they're kind of just waiting for their customer base to die out. I don't think they have like a clear vision for the brand, and certainly the values that drove its production for its first 100 years are a bit forgotten.
And did you get to meet any of your grandparents that were involved in that business?
So on my dad's side, absolutely. On my mom's side, my grandmother is very involved in the historical legacy. So Hiram Walker's son, Edward Chandler, I believe he and his siblings, they built this home in Windsor where the distillery was. And ultimately, during Prohibition, they had to sell the distillery and give up the home and just decide to be American citizens. It seems like they were kind of pressured as they were running the distillery in Canada during the day and shipping it into the United States, sleeping in the United States. But this is during Prohibition. So the United States government did not take this kind of subterfuge lightly. And I don't think my family was particularly, on my mom's side, my family was not particularly concerned with hiding it. I think if anything, they seemed to, looking at old photographs of my family members during this period of time, just having a great time and just carrying like very big bottles of champagne. They didn't seem like it seems like maybe they thought Prohibition was quite silly, and they were pretty proud of skirting the law. So they sold it, and I think I get so lost in that history, and I'm visually like in my imagination going through my Rolodex of photos, and I forgot the original question other than my grandmother is very involved in the historical preservation of that home. It's called Willisted Manor. Oh, sorry. I picked up the thread. So when they sell Canadian Club during Prohibition and decide to be American citizens, they actually leave Willisted Manor to the town of Windsor. And they set it up to be a communal home. It becomes a library. The park is a central part of Windsor even today. A real community place. They have events like Art in the Park. They host a number of weddings. It's just a very big community gathering place. And my grandmother is very active in its preservation. So that would be the closest family member I have to that bit of the business. But they did such a good job at documenting so much of that history. So I have lots and lots of photo albums and even books and historical records where I get to really delve into that history. On my dad's side of the family, they've stayed in the business. So my dad's in the business and my uncles and my cousins and my grandfather. I did not get to meet my great-grandfather, who I hear was a very colorful character. But I really grew up in the industry with my dad's side of the family.
Mm-hmm. And now for your parents, what exactly did your dad do for work within that business?
So he runs Breakthrough Beverage, which is the name of our family business that exists today. And it's a wholesaler of wine and spirits. So he runs that business. Mm-hmm. He also is an active advisor and investor to a number of food and beverage brands. And he did that my whole life as well. And he has sat on the board of the Culinary Institute of America for as long as I can remember. So very involved in the food and beverage space. And my mom was an artist when I was growing up, a mixed media sculptor, and her work is mesmerizing. It always speaks a lot of volumes, but it's also so beautiful. And I think it was interesting growing up with her work and learning that you can say something and make beautiful art at the same time. I grew up in around the art scene in the 90s, and there was a lot of rebuke around making beautiful art, and a lot of artwork was very angular and ugly, and you wouldn't look at it and always know that it was art. And I think the more you opened your mind to expression, you would obviously see it as art, and it was meaningful. But I think that's the point, that she was saying, that you can say something and make beautiful artwork. And I that always that really always stayed with me. And I think when you look at the bottles that I make, so many producers, they say what counts is the liquid. And sometimes you start to think like, wow, this wine producer, it really wants you to just focus on the wine and not the label, because this packaging is ugly and it does not speak to what's in the bottle. But I really believe in this full sensory experience where I want to tap in and engage and excite as much of you as I can. And so, of course, that's like having a meaning behind the bottle and having incredible liquid, but then also having it in a beautiful package. My mom wound up moving more into farming. She kind of physically left the art scene, physically moved to Vermont, but really kept art at the center of what she does. But she's a biodynamic farmer and farm educator, and now really focuses on educating the next generation of farmers. So she teaches young kids farm school through a very complicated and very beautiful badge system where kids kind of level up, learning permaculture, earning their level 1 permaculture, then their 2 and 3, and same with dairying and beekeeping. It's a wild farm up there in Vermont.
Wow. And now for you, did you say you grew up more in New Jersey?
Yeah, so I went to school. I primarily went to school in New Jersey, in Bergen County. And then I spent a lot of after school and weekends in the city. So I had this really nice hybrid life. And my mom would take my brother and I like once a week to a museum, usually the Met, but sometimes the Natural History Museum or MoMA or Guggenheim. And we had these notebooks and these colored pencils, and she would just have us sit and draw for, I guess, like 2 hours after school once a week. And I loved it. My brother loved it. My brother and I are very different. We're very good friends, but we're very different. And he loved it. Mm-hmm. And he became very obsessed with chairs and furniture. And so we had to go out of our way to find exhibits that had to do with furniture or artwork with chairs so that he could draw them.
Mm. And could you describe a little bit how the area was that you grew up in Bergen County, and you mentioned some of the activities you would do going into the city, but how was it? Was it more nature based out there, or?
So, I was in a town that had a beautiful like reservoir and park, and I would spend some time there. And I've always been very into the natural world, but I did not take to Bergen County or my town or my middle school or high school. So when I was in New Jersey, I mostly spent time like pouring through books and inventing things and building things. I grew up on a couple of acres my mom had like a miniature farm and a garden on it. And so I spent time engaging pretty much just at our house. It was a historical house as well. And I've always thought I'm a history buff and I really like architecture. So I really enjoyed being at home, and it was such a refuge from my town, which had a culture that I just did not understand at all. I'm a high school where, as someone who I had such a voracious appetite for knowledge, now I'm very obsessive about the things I'm into, and I don't divert from them very much. My curiosity is very deep, but it is not wide. And when I was a kid, it was very wide and not as deep. And I think I was doing this big survey until I found what I was really passionate about. But yeah, for someone who had such a voracious appetite for knowledge, it blows my mind when I reflect about it, when I was thinking about what we'd be talking about today. And I was reflecting on the teachers I had and how I couldn't remember any of them inspiring me. They did not like help me tap into anything. And I really feel very self-taught in every way. And I love math and I love the sciences and I love history, but I can't think of a math or science or history professor or teacher before college that really did anything for me in those areas.
Wow.
Yeah.
Because you had said you're interested in a lot of the subject matters. It just not relating with how maybe the teachers were teaching, or even at that time would you say you had a favorite subject matter or core classes that you were interested in, but it just wasn't of interest?
Yeah. Yeah. So I was very interested in chemistry, and I was really interested in physics and history. And I would pursue those subjects in an unusual way, I think, for a kid. But I would just do it on my own. And I grew up with a very expansive library. My dad is very into history and physics and had amassed a huge library at home. And so I had all of these books that were way over my head, and I would pour through them, not understanding anything, which I can't remember now why I spent so much time reading them. I think just because I'm telling you, even the introduction to these concepts, I was not grasping, but I was obsessed with reading them anyway and looking at these different graphs and particularly around the physics side of things. Those were the concepts that I wasn't grasping, but I just remember constantly looking through books about like black holes and quantum physics, I'm like Einstein and relativity. But yeah. So I was really interested, and I think I could have benefited from learning more of the foundation, but I just couldn't pay attention in school. And I was often bringing my own books and reading them in class, just like tucking them into my school notebook or into my textbooks and just drifting and doing my own thing. Yeah.
And when you were finishing high school, did you know what you wanted to do as a career, or?
I was very entranced by the liquor industry by high school. I had been very interested in the history from the time I was a kid because there were so many glorified stories, particularly on both sides, but really on my dad's side. And they really captured my imagination. And so I felt strongly about going into the business. I thought I was going to go into law because I've always been very interested in law and politics. And I thought that I wanted to work on contracts and mergers and acquisitions in the liquor side. But I, from a young age, was fascinated by the natural world. And I was always making potions, and I loved chemistry, and the way that chemistry allowed me to track and measure my potions, it almost became like chemistry became my way of measuring the magic in the natural world. And not much has changed there. I just didn't realize that I could turn that into an entire profession, which is what I've done.
But within college, what did you major in for your bachelor's?
So I wound up majoring in political science, and I had started with a minor in engineering and computer science, but it was all done in a program called Mathematica, and I'm dyslexic, and Mathematica works by you have to enter all of your math through a programming language. It really makes no sense, but all of my engineering and math classes required that system, and I couldn't do it. I made too many errors. So within a few weeks of being in college, I made a change, and I decided to pursue politics full on because I loved it. And then I started taking chemistry classes, and my school had some limitations on crossing over that much, and I loved politics so much. I finished all of the requirements before my second semester, my sophomore year. So then I just kept taking chemistry and whatever I had to take. Yeah. And history. Yeah. And I had a history minor.
Okay. And also, in between this time, you mentioned that you had even visited the East End as a child. So how did that come about? Did your parents or family have a connection to either the South Fork or the North Fork?
Yeah, to the South Fork. We had a house in Noyak that we shared as a family, and I loved it there. And it was down this very long driveway that cut through the woods. And architecturally, it was very modern and a very interesting house. And I loved it. I loved being out there. And we started becoming involved at Quail Hill Farm. And I started spending a lot of time at Quail Hill. So when I was young, Scott Chesky started letting my mom drop me off and just leave me there to help out on the farm, which is pretty remarkable that he would do that because kids are useless, you know? And he's not a babysitter. He's running this really well-established and beloved farm, and it's not small, and it's all farmed with the most care and attention to the methods of farming, like ancestral farming. And so it was a ton of work, and I don't know why he let her drop me off, but I spent a lot of time at Quail Hill weeding and picking fruit for the CSA. And I wound up going to work there as an intern for a few summers when I was older and I think more useful. So yeah, that's my tie to the East End. And we just spent a lot of weekends and summers out there, and I loved it. And I didn't come to the North Fork until I was working at a distillery in Brooklyn. And I came out to meet with bars and restaurants on the North Fork, and we were in the process of being acquired. It was called the Noble Experiment. Proximo Spirits was acquiring it. We were the world's only all-female distillery, and we were making this high ester rum. So like a very tropical fruit. It was like tropical pickled fruit and molasses and vanilla and kind of earthy. It was called Oni's rum, and I loved it. But we were being acquired, and I did not want to move over to the new company. I wanted to start my own distillery. And I was coming in through Shelter Island on the ferry and just pulling through, I was overcome. I was so in love with Greenport before I even set foot on it. And I went around having meetings, and during my lunch break, I went on Zillow and I actually found the building that the distillery is in, and I messaged them about making an offer, which was much below the asking price, and they immediately responded. And they said that they'd had multiple offers fall through and they'd already moved to Florida, and if I was serious, that they were very motivated. And that conversation all happened on my first day in Greenport.
Wow.
So I really fell in love with it here.
And so did you, even after college, did you gain a lot of experience within the distillery business? Because you mentioned the one that you're working in Brooklyn, but just before all the, like, kind of, even from your family, but before you decided to even open up, which was Matchbook Distilling Co.
Yeah, so I had worked, my first job out of college was at William Grant & Sons, and it was on the marketing side of the business for Sailor Jerry Rum. And I worked there for almost 3 years, and it gave me an invaluable learning experience around brand building and team management. Mostly I learned that I'm not good at managing people. I would bet that most people aren't naturally good at managing people. I was especially not good at it. And I thought that I was getting better. I thought that I was working on it, but I realized now that I wasn't. What I decided to do was just share my opinion once. And if people didn't agree with it, I would just go with whatever they said. And that wasn't great either. That's not collaboration. Ideally, you want to work with people where you can have an exchange of ideas and you can try different things out in a constructive and safe environment that challenges you the right amount. And I did not learn that. I didn't. And I thought I was figuring it out, but I wasn't at all. And I'm deeply apologetic to anyone that had to work under my management. I was also quite young. So I was 24 when I essentially took over the brand Sailor Jerry Rum in the United States. I was working with a team of people who were really creative and very hardworking. And so it wasn't like it was singularly me. It was an incredible collaborative endeavor. I just wasn't very good at helping people, like supporting people and bringing out the best in them. And I really didn't want to be in marketing anyway. So I was there for a few years and we did some really incredible things while I was there. And I'm super proud of it. Like we began tattooing people in bars at events and found all of these people who loved Sailor Jerry, the artist, so much, or loved the energy of how we were expanding on the legacy. People didn't know who Norman Collins was. They don't know that Sailor Jerry was a real person, and he was like the father of the traditional tattoo. And so we got to communicate that legacy at parties while people were consuming some alcohol and having a good time. And that was great. And watching people tattoo this iconography on them was very game-changing and exciting. And we weren't even entirely sure if it was legal. William Grant, the parent company, had a lot of sternly worded questions about it, but it wound up becoming viral. And now I saw dockers tattooing people at events. It became this sort of viral, sensational thing that people have brought to all types of brands. Just a number of things that made my time at William Grant working on Sailor Jerry very fun and memorable, but definitely not something I wanted to pursue forever. So I left to go get a production job at Oni's Rum. But when I got there, more than production, there was so much that needed to be done around brand building. And it took only so much time to make Oni's. Selling it really required a lot more attention. So I got some exposure to production, and I got some exposure to building a brand new brand, and we opened a bar, and so I got exposure to what it was like to open a bar. And it was me and Bridget, the founder, and then Selena Perez, who came on as a distiller supporting Bridget, and Melissa, who came on supporting all of us and everything we were doing. And then very quickly we were being acquired. And I thought about going to another distillery in the background of what I was really passionate about, and I just decided not to waste any more time. I had been producing beverage alcohol at home for a very long time. I was a home brewer. Home distilling is illegal in the United States, so I just want to be clear, I was absolutely not doing that. So I got a lot of experience in beverage alcohol production through all the legal ways that I could have been. I spent a lot of time in Vermont, where I went to college, and there is a really irreverent culture around home production of alcohol, and that's really where I learned so much. And people in Vermont, they work with what they have around them. So you've got a peach tree, you've got an apple tree, you're growing a bunch of botanicals, and you don't want to use all of your apples and all of your peaches and botanicals to make a spirit. So maybe you use a couple peaches and a couple apples, and then you mix in a bit of corn and some botanicals, and you create this new spirit that doesn't need to have a category. You ferment it together, you distill it, and you have something that's super unique. And that is what I wanted to do. I just wanted to do it professionally. And I wanted to build a distillery that returned to distilling as preservation for a farm. So we would take the odds and ends from the farms around us, and we would create these unique farm beverages. So I decided not to go to another distillery, and instead I decided to scale what I had learned in Vermont and at home, and use the knowledge I had from working in a distillery in Brooklyn.
And what year was that you decided to open Matchbook Distilling?
So I'd wanted to make Matchbook Distilling from the time from when I was like 25. Like, I had it really well conceived in my head. Maybe well conceived is too generous, but I had the drive for it back when I was at William Grant working on Sailor Jerry, and I tried to get a production job there, but they just wanted to keep accelerating me in the marketing track, and I just wasn't interested in that direction. And even when I finally put in my notice, they even in that meeting offered me a very large events marketing job in the company, much grander than I had thought that they would. And it was a very well-resourced global job on Sailor Jerry. And I just realized that they were never going to let me move into the production phase. And it really did help fortify, as difficult it was to leave William Grant, because It's a brilliant company. It's a family-owned company. They own Glenfiddich and Balvenie and Hendricks, and they've been incredible innovators while they've really been rooted in this incredibly historical production. Mm-hmm. So they're very, very, very good at producing these classic, iconic beverages. But then with brands like Hendricks, they show that they are also like beautifully creative. Mm-hmm. So it was hard to leave, but that was very fortifying in terms of my decision getting this other job offer. And I confidently left to pursue production.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of the inspiration behind opening up Matchbook Distilling and finding that property in Greenport, and you had that in mind. I mean, you said even in early on in your career, but when you were finalizing everything, what was going through your mind in terms of how you wanted to put it together? Did you have it all planned out, or was it still early planning stages?
So I had been thinking it would be in Brooklyn. So I thought I was going to be confined to a much smaller space. And I thought I was going to be in a city, which obviously makes no sense. If I want to be tied into farms, how would I do that being in a city? And I had not thought about not being in a city until I got to Greenport, and everything started to click into place. And then as soon as I saw this space, 230 Corwin Street, where we are today, I started making phone calls to everyone that I was connected to that could help me start to build out the production space. So I was much more production focused, production minded than I was the business plan. I felt like, if you build it, they will come. Mm-hmm. That was my thinking. Mm-hmm. And the challenge was I was going to build this farm distillery that just did contract production. I wasn't even going to I wasn't going to create my own brands, which if anyone listening that is familiar with Matchbook or even Googled it, like that's very far from what we are today. Mm-hmm. We have a huge portfolio of at least 30 brands, which are changing all the time. So I wanted to build this contract facility, which meant that and a contract facility that just made these unique farm spirits. I thought the only reason those spirits weren't being made was because there wasn't a production facility to make them at, which was true. So I thought people were dying to make them and drink them. They just didn't have a means to doing so. Mm-hmm. So I needed to figure out how to build a distillery that could produce any style of spirit from any type of agriculture and at any scale. And that distillery just didn't exist anywhere in the world as far as I knew. And so it presents a number of engineering challenges, especially in a space as large as the one I wanted to build it in. And so I worked Gable Arenzo, who was the son of Ralph Arenzo, the founder of Hudson Whiskey. He wound up being very instrumental in helping me. I spoke with the head of production for Bacardi Spirits, who also gave me a lot of help. And I'd say those two and Bridget Fertile from The Noble Experiment, they really helped me build out the plans and for the production floor. And then I worked with a number of consultants. All in all, from purchasing the building to opening up, it took 2 years of planning and construction.
Wow. And then you knew you were going to offer a wide range of spirits, and also linking it with, Greenport has a rich history and culture. And how did you draw any inspiration from the surrounding area? You mentioned farming, but any other, the surrounding or local community?
Yeah, I think primarily it is farming rooted. And I've always been in love with the Arc of Taste by Slow Food since they created it. And it's a index of flavorful agricultural products that are facing extinction because farms aren't growing them. And so I saw agriculture that had been grown on Long Island that were facing this plight, and just went to farms and found people who would grow them. The Long Island cheese pumpkin was one, which now has been revived, and that's like the biggest success story, I believe, at least for New York, on the Arc of Taste. Mm-hmm. And then the Boston marrow squash became the next one. I couldn't even find a photo of it online. So when Pete Treber, who was growing them for me, called me up and said that the squash some of them were over 40 pounds and that we would have to come and help harvest them, that was very, very exciting, and felt like a very unique connection to be having with the North Fork. Mm-hmm. Then in another way, I got very into cooking in earth ovens. And so for two of our spirits, our smoked pineapple spirit and our smoked sunchoke spirit, those are both done in a way that's heavily influenced by sort of clam bakes and general fire pit cooking, which also I feel really grounds me in some of the history and cooking methods on the East End. And New England. And I think those really root me. And I think very much just the landscape and what grows wild around here. We do some foraging while being very mindful of not foraging too much. Again, that goes back to creating these really diverse, unusual cornucopia type spirits. So I don't need pounds and like tens or hundreds of pounds of any one thing. I can just like add a sprinkle of something that I forage, like beach roses, and make sure there's still plenty for everyone else who wants to enjoy them.
And with taste testing and seeing how some of these spirits are, how is that process, and even with some of the different spirits?
So for me, production of beverage alcohol is fundamentally a tactile process. So I'm not a creative director or steerer of beverages and products at Matchbook. I actually make them all from scratch with my hands. I have an incredible team that supports those efforts. My second at the distillery is Scott D'Antonio, who is instrumental in our production. And everyone else who works at the distillery jumps in when needed. But I really raise these spirits from the time the raw ingredients come into the distillery till the point where they are bottled and out the door. And I think working in that way builds a really rich intuition. And so now that I've been producing spirits this way very prolifically for the last 8 years, but then also in a very dedicated fashion for 10 years prior at home, I really don't even do much recipe development in the lab for myself. For me, I'm really raising these ingredients into these final products. So my intuition built through that experience allows me to start with a raw material and commit to an action and start that processing and guiding and real raising phase. And I'm smelling and tasting everything all the time, daily, as I'm raising them. And from there, I can figure out the next steps or the next ingredients to add. And I'm very thoughtful about time and temperature, being ingredients, water, salt, all of these conditions of the natural environment are ingredients in shaping these beverages just as much as the raw materials going into it. So really just honoring the power of that. And so I think a lot about the chemistry and biology of these ingredients and their interactions. But again, really just as a way of measuring the natural world and these natural processes and setting up the conditions so that I can ultimately show off the natural world in its peak. Mm-hmm. When fruits taste their most expressive, when the ester profiles are just leaping out of the glass and out of the bottle. And it's so much less about manipulation. You can take a restaurant like 11 Madison Park that is at the top of the food game in the world, and they make this move to become vegan, and all of their dishes are about using their incredibly vast skill set toolbox to manipulate these ingredients into often unrecognizable finished plates. And that is an incredible skill set to have. For me, though, I am about expressing what's naturally there. And then the real alchemy is a fruit is only perfect for a second, a day, an hour. A flower even more so. But through the alchemy that the tools allow me to perform at the distillery, I can capture the essence at that peak moment, and I can make it last forever. And that's the magic. Yeah. Forever or until you drink it.
Yes. And I was curious about even the production process. How big of a production is it in terms of the quantity and then even distribution of the product?
So for my fermenters and stills, I have 100-gallon, 300-gallon, and 600-gallon batch sizes. And I have no idea how much I produce every year, primarily because I produce so many things. So for several years, we released 2 unique spirits every single month. So unique liquid, unique branding, completely unique spirit. 2 every month for several years was insane. We just stopped doing that this year. It allowed us to hyperdrive our experience in commercial production, and it allowed us to work with all of these different ingredients and get to know them all really, really well. Mm-hmm. So while I don't know if I would recommend that as the smartest business model for a long period of time, it's a recipe for burnout for sure. But we were so passionate and enthusiastic about trying it all and doing it all as quickly as possible. And we still have inventory of handfuls of bottles of all of those early, not all of them. We've sold out of a lot of things, but it's so cool to even go through the archives where we saved a bottle and taste through them. And it's so energizing just to look back at all of the bottles that we made over the last couple of years. But because our production is so diverse, I don't know what the total volume we wind up producing is, but we I'm on the production floor 5 days a week, all year round. So a lot of production. And then we still do contract production. So producing for our clients. And it's primarily just me and Scott doing all of the production, which is wild. And then for distribution, we do direct to consumer online to all of the states that we're allowed to out of our partner in Washington, D.C. They're very strict beverage alcohol laws in the United States. And then we have distribution in a number of states in the U.S. where we have a distributor selling to bars and restaurants. So Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, Massachusetts. We self-distribute in New York, Georgia, Tennessee. We just launched in Connecticut and New Jersey, and we're launching in DC. And then we're in Colorado, Illinois, and California. So a number of states where we have distributors with sales reps on the ground introducing the spirits that we make and sell, which is very exciting.
Yes. And even since you started, have you seen growth within the business, in your business?
Yeah, absolutely. We continue to grow each year. And I think in craft distilling, there was this big boom where all of these distilleries started to proliferate in the States. It started with, there's a distillery in California, and the name is escaping me. They make brandy, and they make beautiful brandy, and the distiller really kicked off a craft distilling movement. And I feel terrible I can't think of his name in this moment because he really inspired me. I've never met him before. I've just been a super fan of his work. And then Tuttletown, the Orenzo family, they picked it up in New York, and they had to lobby very hard to change the laws in New York to create a pathway to craft distilling. And once they did, the floodgates opened, and quickly 100 plus distilleries opened in New York State. So you had this boom that happened maybe 10, 15 years ago. Mm-hmm. But now you're seeing, after this expansion, a contraction where distilleries are closing, and they had proliferated from coast to coast, and then they started closing. And I don't know if it's random. And I think there were distilleries that opened that started producing these spirits that were already being made really well. If you are a musician and you want to make a name for yourself, you don't go out with a song that Adele is already singing, right? Mm-hmm. She is like a platinum artist. She has the voice of that captured the hearts and minds of a generation. You don't need to compete with that. Mm-hmm. Just like maybe competing with bourbon is not necessary when you have the likes of Buffalo Trace and Jack Daniels, who are already doing it really well and doing it at such a low price point because they're so vertically integrated and they have national distribution. So I think distilleries that came out with kind of photocopies of these spirits that were already doing really well, doing what they did for a very long time and doing it very well, have struggled. But I think distilleries and producers that either took something that wasn't being made very well and innovated it and made it more interesting and more delicious and gave it a sustainable root in its production, rooted it in agriculture. Those people, I think, are doing really well. And the people who started to create unique spirits that couldn't be found anywhere else and making them exceptionally well, I think those people are doing really well. So I don't think that it's a contraction across the board. I think there are a lot of producers that are going to keep growing and flourishing. And I do think there's going to be a very painful fallout. So if you, person listening, or you are very interested in New York or US craft whiskeys, I would go out and buy them today. And maybe you can help them stay open. And definitely go and buy them today because you might not be able to buy them tomorrow.
And also, in terms of, we talked about buying the products and distribution, but do you also have people can visit the distillery and there's a tasting room experience? Can you talk a little bit about that and what that's like.
Yeah, so we're a very tiny team. So our distillery is open Saturdays from 1 p.m. to 6 p.m. only. The exception for that is if you're staying at our sister property, the Lynn Beach House, where most of us at the distillery also live. We will set up appointments for you at the distillery outside of those times, other than Sundays. Sundays is a required day for everyone to take off. We need rest, and we need to enjoy the North Fork. But any other day but Sunday, if you're staying at the Lynn, then you can visit the distillery and take a tour and have a private tasting. Otherwise, the distillery is open Saturdays from 1 to 6. And by appointment, we have really unique experiences that let you delve into matchbook spirit making, which is very unique compared to other distilleries the world over. One of the experiences is our Create Your Own Gin program. So we have a rotating selection of 30 different single botanical distillates, which we make from scratch, starting with milling the corn, fermenting it, distilling it to neutral, and then redistilling it with a single botanical, like local elder flower or locally grown Szechuan buttons, and you can blend them together to make your own signature 750 ml of a gin that you leave with that day. So that's a very unique experience that people love to do. We do them by appointment on Saturdays at 1 p.m. or 3 p.m. And then we have a barrel tasting experience where you can go and taste a few different whiskeys straight out of the barrel. Some of those traditional whiskeys that I'm super proud of, or some of our more experimental spirits. So then visiting the distillery is unique, even if you just walk in, because we produce all these different spirits, right? Starting with the core, like very traditionally rooted in skill and tradition, spirits like a single malt and a bourbon, whiskeys that I'm unbelievably proud of, all made with certified organic grains grown in New York State, that are unbelievably flavorful, to very non-conforming spirits, like fortified wine made from Boston marrow squash instead of vinifera grapes, and everything in between. So yeah, a unique experience. I can't take as much credit for that side of the business. I developed the Create Your Own Gin program, but the rest of the tasting room and its experiences really are my partner, Paul Monahan, our COO, and Stephanie, who works in the tasting room, and everyone else who kind of pitches in around the tasting room.
Wonderful. And do you have any other exciting projects or collaborations that you might be involved in the future or coming up?
Yeah, totally. My husband, who's my other partner in the distillery, he and I collaborate on a range of spirits called Blind Duck. So there's Blind Duck and Bugle Juice, and they are rooted in his experiences hunting, and they're really unique liquids that come to life. So drinking LaRue is very popular when duck hunting, but LaRue is this blackberry infused brandy, and it tastes like cough syrup. So the original Blind Duck is a biodynamic Pinot Gris eau de vie infused with local blackberries, mostly from Treber Farms, from Sang Lee, Seps, Latham. So that's really fun and delicious, and an internal collaboration. Then I recently did a collaboration with the Culinary Institute of America called Maillard, and I went up to the CIA and we browned over 400 pounds of New York butter, and then drove at night back to the distillery and got this cooling brown butter into a spirit made from fermented oats, and infused that for about a month. And then I sweetened it with some brown sugar, and it's all about bottling the Maillard reaction. So that was a really fun collaboration. I worked with one of my favorite breweries. I'm not a big beer drinker. It's part of why I got into home brewing, because I got to make the exact beers that I liked drinking. But I love the beer from Wunderkammer, which is a brewery built into a cheese cave, which is built into a hill. It's pretty hidden in the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont. My friend Vasilios is the owner brewer, and we made this collaborative Amaro, and the base is his beer, and it's a fortified distillation of the same mash bill made at Matchbook. And the spirit that we made was distilled with botanicals foraged around the Lynn and around Matchbook, but then also around the brewery. And we used that to fortify the beer. And then we added a little bit of sugar. So yes, this like wild beer Amaro.
Wow.
Yeah, and then I'm working with Hannah Macaulay, which is a Macaulay brewery in Brooklyn, so a Korean rice wine. My friend Alice, who's the owner, head brewer, she is another producer who is she does production every day. And so we are kindred spirits, and we distill the Macaulay into a soju, which gets bottled at 60% at still strength, which is unusually high in the world of spirits today, but which goes back to the tradition of making sojus, which today are traditionally made pretty inexpensively and bottled in plastic around 23%. So bringing this back to the root of soju production. So I learn a lot from her, and I'm very inspired by her and our collaboration. But yes, we love collaborations, and we have lots more to come.
Wonderful. And we had talked about the craft distilling industry. You said there was the significant growth, but you kind of see that in terms of leveling off a bit, or...
I don't. I see.
You don't see it? Oh.
What I see is, I see people sort of replicating spirits that are already on the market and are made really well. Those are falling down, but spirits that are really innovative, or spirits that are taking something that is in the market but they're making it in a reimagined way. So I think a good example would be my friend Rachel at Current Cassis. So she's making a cassis, but it's from these fresh cassis berries grown in New York, and they're just so delicious. She gets them into her production facility. She lightly ferments them. It's I think a co-ferment with some red wine grapes. There's like a rosé portion in there. And then she's using a New York grape or grain spirit to then fortify it to arrest the fermentation. And she adds these botanicals that she grows outside of her production facility. So she's doing well. I think spirits like that are going to continue to do really well. There's a woman making this rye whiskey that she makes from scratch, and then she sweetens with some honey that she gets from her on-site apiary. Gosh, I wish I could think of her. I think it's something Catskills or honey related. She is brilliant. I think she's doing really well. She's going to continue to grow. Spirits that find their producers who have their own voice. They are going to continue to do well. But I think people who are going to replicate beloved spirits that are already out there, and then do it at a much higher price point, even if they're using local organic grains, unless there's a really profound terroir story or a really profound environmental story, something about grain shed, something about land use, and spirits that are grounded in taking care of the earth, I think are going to do really well. But the cowboy producers of whiskeys and vodkas, I think they are falling off.
And would you say you've seen that even there was a few years ago, even the rise of even microbreweries within the craft beer market? I don't know if you saw some similar things within that with replicating different beers, but I know you mentioned that.
So beer is so hard to make. When you finish a beer, the pH is quite high, the alcohol is quite low, and there are unfermented sugars in there. It is a ripe environment for the microbial world to take over. Beers can go bad very easily. Being a brewer is gotta be one of the most challenging and stressful jobs out there, especially if you're really passionate about like hitting the mark of your specs for your beer and the like profile, the flavor and aromatic profile. So it's just different. If nobody buys my whiskey this year, that's fine. Like, it will just keep sitting in barrel, and its ester profile will just keep getting more sophisticated. So esters are acids and alcohols that combine to create these aromatic profiles, and wood is full of these organic volatile compounds that dissociate and produce into short and medium chain fatty acids, which will create new esters, and the esters that exist will break up and they'll rearrange. Essentially, in aging a whiskey, you can, if you give it the right conditions, you can set up this cascade of flavor creation that just keeps developing over time if you give it the right conditions. So I give my whiskeys the correct conditions by distilling them in a certain way and using certain ingredients and working with certain types of barrels. So those whiskeys just keep getting better with time. Beer is not that way. Beer will keep changing. It will go bad. It's a different universe. Yeah. So tons of breweries opened up. They proliferated like wildfire, and there was a lot of new talent in there that was kind of learning on the job. It's much easier to learn on the job in the world of distilling. You can just keep playing with things and keep aging things. Brewing is tough. Even wine, at least you've got a low pH, you've got double the alcohol. A lot can go wrong in the wine world too, and wines continue to age and transform and will eventually fall off in a way that whiskey or distilled spirits won't. But like, they're inherently terminal, but that end of life for beer is very short. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Be a distiller. If you have to produce beverage alcohol, you want to be a distiller.
Yes. And you mentioned some advice for people that, if they are getting into the business, enter the craft spirits industry. Was there any other advice you might give people aspiring or entrepreneurs looking?
Yeah.
I mean, you mentioned that you need to be, I think, like you said, working within the local environment and having a unique and not replicating is important.
So finding your own voice, and then making sure that you're going to be good at selling it, not just making it. Because if you're just good at making it, then you might just have an incredibly rich hobby. And that's great. Like, be a home producer, and that is a really special world to be in. But you have to be able to sell what you're producing. I think people should get someone to make them a proof of concept batch. And even though it will be very expensive and you won't make your money back doing that batch you will not break even on that batch. Mm-hmm. It's still so important to find out if you have a market if you are any good at selling it and if you enjoy selling it, because that is going to be a big part of what you do. And then understand that it's going to take a very long time to build. So make sure you have a lot of cash available and that you're building as lean as possible. It's a very difficult business to break into. And I think people ask how I did it. And I think I could very easily tell a story that I'm just a unicorn, but it's not the story, right? The story is that I come from generations of beverage alcohol production and distribution, and that I grew up inside of the business, and I grew up around people who were very passionate about it. I saw it from all angles, and I got to start doing it very young.
And then I had two other questions more in general about the North Fork. Since coming out here and with your business and working out here, what do you like about living and working on the North Fork?
Everything. I love it here, and I try to leave as little as possible. More and more, I have to travel to my distributors and get them excited about selling our product, but I try to condense it to a few number of months so that I can spend so much time here. What I love about here is the landscape and the water. I need to be by the water. I've always been that way. And I love the pace that I can set for my life. And I can set it. And sometimes it changes, and sometimes it's going very fast, and other times it's going very slow. But I think it's very unique to live in a place where you can set your own pace. And the people of the North Fork make a lot of room for you to set your own pace. And I think the only thing they ask in return is that you do not impede their ability to set their pace as well. And I have a lot of respect for that. And when I've seen the North Fork getting press, more and more press, I think that the North Fork is often misunderstood, and that the people here are misunderstood. And I think more than anything that pace and freedom is very important to people here.
Absolutely. And then looking to the future, what do you hope for the future of the North Fork and its community down the line?
Trees would be number one. I really hope that we all have trees and space for, again, that pace, and cold water and fish. And I think these things are all but guaranteed, and we really need to protect them. We've been very mindful with our impact, and we've chosen to not cut down any trees or build anything new. We moved into existing buildings, and understandably, they're limited because our geography is limited. We are surrounded by water, and we're a long, skinny island. But we can't create more space. We have a finite amount, and we need to be very mindful and very respectful of what makes this place so unique.
And I just ask if there's anything else you'd like to say or discuss that we haven't talked about.
I just want to say that this place is very important to me, and my family is very important to me, and I am obsessed with my husband, who just seems to think I can do anything that I set my mind to. He's just my biggest champion, and nothing in my life would be like this without him. And my parents and my brother and my sister-in-law and my in-laws, my aunts and my uncles, my family, I just feel so blessed. And yeah, I'm really grateful that I got to come here and talk all about this with you.
Yeah, definitely.
And I would have been remiss if they hadn't come up. So thank you for asking me.
No, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to come on today and share your story and really that fascinating history with your family, as well as talking about your wonderful business out here and your love for the North Fork.
Thank you.
Well, I hope you enjoyed episode 80 with Leslie Merinoff. I want to thank you for listening to the Floyd Memorial Library podcast, and we'll see you next time.